Mr. Pyle, who was the person who actually invented steel pan?
By coincidence. By a coincidence. It just happened. And I could go further to tell you that anyone who tried to claim he had invented the steel pan out of context, no one person could take claim that they invented the pan. Because during the period of 1935 it was still bamboo. During the Carnival period, they used to play. Right? And within a coincidence, during that time, the guys from Gonzales used to be beating the bamboo band. And at the same time, in the yard that they was practicing was a yard they used to call Tantiville Yard. It had an old chassis, car chassis there. And while they beating the bamboo, a guy used to be knocking the chassis with that song. And by a coincidence, on a Boxing Day, one of the guys beating the bamboo, it split. And in the heat of this rhythm, he wanted something to beat. Tootie Wilson was his name, Wilson Brothers. And he just dashed around the corner, looking for something to do with him in him, and he wanted something to buy. He picked up a paint pan, and he started beating this paint pan. The others hearing this song, more melodious than the bamboo pounding on the streets. They all discard them, and they all run to, who could have get dustbins, take dustbins, who could have get old utensils, take utensils, and there and then, that was the dustbin ban. It wasn't steel ban. The name steel ban wasn't invented. It was the dustbin bans. But the typical West Indian is a copycat. A group of fellows only want to hear something and see something. And every man, from east, west, north and south, just disregard bamboo and went to pan.
Yeah, there we go. Oh,
good everything. Yeah.
Good everything.
You want to keep going? You want to continue?
No. That's it. Oscar Powell said every man disregard bamboo. Disregard bamboo.
Good everything. Why do you want to start here today?
Well, we know, as you know more intimately than most of us, this is the weekend for the annual, I think they're at the 58th Caribbean American Parade Festival on the Parkway. Things have been underway. Today, I think, is the steel band competition. And then Juve Monday morning. And then, of course, in the wee hours, and then they open up with everything else. But as we were getting ready to go live this morning, you shared a tidbit. I said, oh, wait, no, don't tell me. Tell everybody. You've been to that parade, huh, probably?
Asked me, have I been to the West Indian Day Parade? And I was like, I was a vendor one year. Of course, I covered it as well. The threat of violence as a reporter for the New York Daily News. But one year, and this for New Yorkers, the West Indian Day Parade is on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. It is, I think, one of the biggest parades in the country. 1 million plus people will convene on Eastern Parkway, which that same boulevard became the undoing of David Dinkins's administration when there was a Crown Heights riot, when a Hasidim caravan mowed down 2 children playing in the streets. Gavin Cato lost his life. I actually did a interview with his father, the only interview with his father for the front page of Daily News. But, we've lived. I was telling you, I had a friend named Roland Collymore, a really good friend of mine, and he was leaving corporate America and he wanted to get into vending. And I had a connection with the folk that sell the shaved ice in the Bronx. And so I connected him with him. And so they became a distributor of something called Vitamalt, which Roland, he was Trinidadian, wanted to do. So I was out there with him selling Vitamalt one year on Eastern Parkway as a vendor. So it's beautiful, actually.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, I know you say, you've written so many books. It's had so much recognition for writing books, but one of these books at some point you're gonna have to share some of your life so that those stories are preserved and carried forward. Although in this
I
form,
was
and of
gonna
course,
say, we're doing it here. What is a book,
it's
Dr.
true.
Carr? We
Uh,
are we are oral traditionalists, right? So
I understand. In fact, there was a long article Thursday I shared with my students on. In fact, it wasn't an article. The whole section of the New York Times, I think the life section, was devoted to literacy. Ironically, the next day, yesterday, there was an article in the Friday New York Times which noted that the Atlanta Journal Constitution will shortly stop printing its paper edition and go all digital. But at any rate, yeah, I was just telling them, I mean, reading has shifted, and you're right. No, you're of course, you're absolutely right.
this is really we started this journey when I asked, not just can I hit record, but I was like, how do we learn? And you said
Hmm?
around a tree, an elder, and it was multi generations, and 286 consecutive Saturdays now. We have all Saturdays or Fridays or Thursday, every week,
Every week.
sometimes some extra. We have convened around this tree,
Mm.
and you have changed my life. And, I was talking to Deontay Kyle, who does this podcast called Grits and Eggs. And he's been doing it for a couple of years. And something about that young man just hit my spirit. So I've been trying to get him on the show. He came on this week. And, when he talked about, his moment, his Damascus moment, because he had been in trouble, almost this close to going away to jail for a while in the streets, selling the drugs, all of the stuff. His grandmama died. And so he went to church, because he wanted to
Mm.
honor her spirit as an ancestor. He wanted to honor her spirit and go to church. And then that led him down a rabbit hole to start studying about religion.
Uh,
And, but it's like, you don't know what's going to be the entree into your awakening, and it's going to be different for everybody, which is why, when you talk about reading comic books, getting those funny papers that your father didn't respect,
right.
look at you today. It's like, it doesn't matter how somebody gets to a place. And then he talked about Hidden Colors, and I was like, it took that. He was like, I know, but by the third one I was out. But it opened me up to start reading because I wanted to know more. And every day you drop breadcrumbs. I want to thank you. Urban View Mornings, I was driving around yesterday, and then you had General Honor Ray on.
Yes.
Those of you who don't have SiriusXM, you can get like a trial subscription.
Yeah, but y'all should get it.
Y'all should get a trial subscription. Urban View Mornings is like the perfect show, because by the time you get to me, everybody knows everything. So I'm not even committed to the news the way you are. Y'all, man, his interview yesterday when he talked about the power of the community and how we have to be in community so that nobody gets left behind. Like, that should never happen again, because we can't depend on the government. We will not be able to depend on this government, and we should always depend on one another. He said that the people who died were elderly, infirmed, and poor, but no one checked on them. And that hit me, because he was like, we should have captains in each neighborhood. You should know who everybody is. If somebody is missing, you should know, because there's going to be another hurricane, there's going to be another disaster, and there's going to be another man-made something, because we live around people who aren't developed. So
I don't it's not lost on me, and every day it strengthens the synergy, the unbroken connection. We had General Honore on. Of course, he's obviously been on the channel before us, obviously. But um, it came really in the wake of last week, when you started with one of the two new documentaries that he's in. As you noted yesterday, last week, a week ago, the Kugler project, and of course he's in both that and the Spike Lee project that came out on Netflix a few days after that. And it just continued through the week as you talked about it, as it was talked about, because of course we're still in the corridor of the anniversary. And so when we got a chance to talk with him, it was just a continuation of that. And here we are 7 days later. And so it's not lost on me the unbroken continuum in a forest now. Forest may not be the best word. In a swarm of noise. Everyone has a podcast, has an upload, but the prescience to get out in front of it 5.5 years ago, even as we received news this week that if you are under 65, it's going to be increasingly difficult. I read something this morning that says CVS is canceling in a dozen or more states, making it more difficult to get the COVID vaccine, even as rates jump up. But 5.5 years ago, we didn't know any of that, and the prescience you had to go immediately in that direction has led to, even as the noise now has, the volume has been turned back up and even exceeded what it was 5.5 years ago. There is a steady, steady, steady continuum of fresh water. So again, that gratitude that we all have for this space, even as I'm seeing here in both of the chats, somebody in YouTube said you can get Vitamalt everywhere. That's what I was saying before we went on. So you a Vitamalt vendor, that's it. But everybody around the world is listening now. I mean, so even the small passing remark resonates.
Stuff in my veins, and then they said it was healthy. Man, I mean, high sugar, but my, at least a couple of years. Myself, I had cases of it in my house. As you're talking, prescient. So, having been on CNN on a Paula Zahn show for a couple of years, and then a paid contributor on MSNBC for 3+ years, it was fascinating to me the amount of incompetent people that they gave microphones to. And I'm saying even me, like, my specialty, I covered child welfare and education on the New York Daily News editorial board, right? Mm-hmm. Child welfare, education. I was a business writer and I was a sports reporter. I started my career there. I never talked about those things. They never asked me about those things, and they wouldn't even tell me what they were going to ask me before I got on there. So how could anybody be an expert in anything? So it was these hot takes. So I had a kind of a 5-year window of understanding that none of this is real. So we have to create the world we want to live in. And I understood I have a particular set of skills. I am a journalist I was teaching it for 25+ years, that there's going to need to be a place that people can trust, that we commit ourselves to getting it right. And then I wanted to surround myself with people with that same commitment. And that wasn't even hard, because those folk don't get an opportunity to have a voice anywhere, because it's about the hot takes. It's about the rating spikes. And fortunately for me, I'm able to do both. They love me coming in, clapping back and all of that. But at some point, I'm like, well, what is the point? So when I got on the radio, I made a conscious decision to never go on cable news, because it would be in conflict for me. Other people do what you got to do, build your platforms, whatever. For me, it would be in conflict with what I'm doing on the radio, which is to try to get it right every day and be in community with people and have discussions about the things that matter. That's not what cable news is. So me being on there, while it would get a bigger audience, because they were pushing me to do that, I'm like, for what? A bigger audience for what? Even if I'm able to have that, it's fleeting. Let's build one person at a time, brick by brick, around this notion that we are here in community and we're trying to get it right. We're trying to build the world we want to live in. So that, yeah.
No, and that's it. That's exactly it. We build this community and we prepare for moments such as this. We don't need everybody. It's never been everybody. Everybody went at the March on Washington. Everybody wasn't right. Anything, anybody. But at key moments, the critical mass forms, but it forms around people who have been consistent. And as we think about this week and think about the phrase that we all know, labor of love, we know that is work that is outward facing, that is for community. And when we say we're engaged in a labor of love, of course, that's what we are doing here on this Labor Day weekend. As you started there, we saw the elder who has been an ancestor now. I think he made transition in 2008, Oscar Powell, Bogart Powell, who was one of the founding parents of the steel band, cultural meaning making efforts in Trinidad. He would be, I think he was born in 22, so I mean he would be 103 if he was still walking on top of the earth. But we know those numbers are most directly meaningful only to those of us who continue to walk on top of the earth. He's not 103 years old. I mean, he was before that and he's after that. But yes.
I just wanted to pop back in
Yes.
because what you said was really profound, that the steel band came out of an accident. But,
Yeah.
but it's not an accident when we're in community and we're doing. And they were banging bamboo, something happened. When we bang against each other, something happens. And if we're coming together to make music, whatever that music is, whether it's knowledge, whether it's building, whether it's creating, when we come together and make music, accidents are never accidents, because that's how we evolve, right? It's those happy moments when we're together. So that resonated with me. I just wanted to say that.
No, I'm glad you did that, because that and again, this dialogue is what allows us to really brings out and allows us to layer the conversation and the learning, taking us back 286, as you say, to the beginning. How do we learn? This is how we learn. We're in conversation. And you picking up on that really picks up on the key thing. If we think about our Africana framework, our Africana Studies framework, which is the guiding kind of baseline for all of what we've been trying to do in this moment, in this rhythm. You know, the social structure, the first of our 6 conceptual categories. What was the social structure in Trinidad in the 1920s and 30s? And of course, Trinidad is still colony. You still have the human traffickers, their descendants, who want to lord it over. The Africans and the indigenous people, who, of course, by then have commingled in many ways, and there have been injections of others from the Indian subcontinent and so forth. And so in Trinidad, you have this colonial rule continuing, and the resistance to that rule and the governance formation for the second of our 6 conceptual categories. The second category, who are Africans to each other, and then of course radiating out from who we are to each other. Who are we to other people in the context of who we are to each other, which is a governance conversation, not who we are to each other as a social structure. The social structure is colonialism. The social structure is oppression. The social structure is resistance to that. From the governance formation, who we are to each other, these African people are engaged in a form of cultural meaning making. And of course, cultural meaning making is the 5th of the categories, conceptual categories. How do we make meaning? Rituals, music, icons, shrines, totems, art, this kind of thing. Well, they're making music. And they're making music with the 4th of the 6 conceptual categories, which is science and technology. What is the science involved? The science involved is the bamboo, because they brought making rhythm with inanimate objects from Africa, and the process of what would be called in social structure circles stick fighting, or what might be called in these Africana governance formations, the demonstrations of skill using sticks or using the human body, whether it be wrestling and this kind of thing, but the sticks make a sound. And so that bamboo is replacing whatever they were using on the African continent, the East, Central, West, North, South Africa. And they brought that over with them, and it got dumped into, as a result of human trafficking, Trinidad and Tobago. And so but the way of knowing, which is the 3rd of our conceptual category, social structure, governance structure, ways of knowing, then science and technology, cultural meaning making, movement and memory, that 3rd category, ways of knowing, to what end are you using those sticks? You're generating in your cultural meaning making a rhythm, but what is the purpose of that rhythm? The purpose of that rhythm is community. And you hear Bogart Powell talk about community there. They're in that circle, they're building that community. And when, as he said, the bamboo split, the bamboo split, the bamboo split, the stick broke. But guess what can't stop? The rhythm, the community, the circle. He said they were in the yard. So what does he do? He said, adjacent to where they pounding these sticks in this rhythm, which is a proxy for making community with the rhythm and the cultural meaning making, adjacent to it was an old chassis, a car. So is he hitting on the fender? Is he hitting on the door? Is he hitting on the roof? Whatever he's doing, and if y'all ever been in a classroom like I was when I was in the 2nd, 3rd grade, when you got a bunch of black boys before the bell rang, we at our desk, we making rhythm with our pencils, with our hands, beating on them desks. And it's eerie to people who don't know that we always making rhythm, because did these little boys plan this? Yeah, we planned it. We planned it in the rhythm of the church, the rhythm of the street, the rhythm of the home, wherever they're. We're going to make some noise, and it's going to be community. People ain't going to be going off by themselves unless it's a contrapuntal force in the general rhythm, what Robert Farris Thompson and them might call polyrhythm, multiple meter. We're going to make it all sound good. So the stick broke, I'm pounding on the chassis, then he go around the corner and get something else. Science and technology, the 4th category, the conceptual category. Science and technology. You go from the stick and beating on the old car to hitting on a steel drum because of so much trafficked oil coming through the Caribbean in the social structure. And what do? To perfect it, they saw the steel barrel until they can get the bottom. Then they start putting various dents in it until they can tune it. And then they create, it's attested by musicologists and others, the only original musical instrument created in the 21st century, the pan. But just like Oscar Powell said, he didn't, well, at his funeral, actually, I was reading about his funeral. And if you want to get a good book where Oscar Powell, Bogart Powell is featured, Mr. Powell, Baba Powell, who was a co-founder of the first steel band association in 1950. That is the Steel Band Association. Of course, they had to come together because for a generation, they had been being harassed by the colonial authorities. So these cats were considered outlaws. Footnote, ironic, isn't it? I was watching the police chief in New York say this a couple of days ago, actually yesterday. She was saying that there will be thousands. The number the newspapers reported was 2,500 police officers in Brooklyn to make sure everybody is safe. Okay, law enforcement. She said that is the largest deployment of police officers for an event in New York of the year. More than New Year's Eve in Times Square, more than July 4th, more than the Puerto Rican Day Parade, more than any other event is on the Parkway for the West Indian Day Parade. And I'm saying that as a prelude to what I'm about to say. I'm out of the footnote now, back into the narrative as I was narrating here about what happened in the Caribbean in the 1930s and 40s. The law enforcement officials did not like these musicians, these pan players. In fact, they called it bad Johnism. Bad Johnism. Because these people pounding on this instrument, pounding and making these rhythms, like the Rastas in Jamaica, Rastafari, are considered ungovernable. To quote, in fact, I was just rereading the good brother Julius Scott, the ancestor Julius Scott, his dissertation, 1986 dissertation, which was finally published as a book, The Common Wind, African American Currents in the Age of the Haitian Revolution. And he calls the Caribbean in this book, famously, Julius Scott, Professor Scott, calls it the ungovernable Caribbean. These Africans can't be governed. But then again, I don't know any Africans that can be governed, really. But at any rate, the police didn't like them. Law enforcement didn't like them. And the pan guys were up for the fight with the police. Sometimes they fought each other. Sometimes they fought the petty bourgeois Negroes who sometimes be between the police and the streets. I think about the great Sparrow, Mighty Sparrow, the Calypsonian, because, they made up all these songs. When Eric Williams, the first prime minister of independent Trinidad and Tobago, came to power and was running for election on his way to power. And the people, the masses of people, like him. He's leading folks to independence, but there's also a class critique involved because they are concerned that the prime minister will impose upon them undue burdens in the form of tariffs, in the form of raising the prices on everything from taxi fare to milk. He said, don't balance the budget on our backs. No, doctor, no. That was Mighty Sparrow's famous song. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I'll be able to remember this morning. See if I can remember. They raise up on the taxi fare. No doctor, no. Why they make the blasted price of milk so dear? Oh, no doctor, no. We want you to remember. We'll remember you come September. You better come good, good, good. Else I got a big piece of mango wood. No, they had to camp, hey man, you better, hey, don't raise that money because we got this mango wood out here for your ass if you run for prime minister and we don't like what you're talking about. Any rate, I would say they should make a song like that for Trump, but since ain't nobody seen him in a few hours, we may have some new news before the end of the week. Who knows? In my prayers, I pray for every human on the planet to get what they give. That's my art. That's the way the Egyptians do it. If you want to pray for somebody to have a difficult time, understand that whatever you pray for them, coming back on you. So I ain't about to wish nothing on nobody except what they gave out. Yeah, that's just fair, wouldn't you say? But at any rate, yeah, so when you hear Oscar Powell, that is Africana in a pure sense. And isn't it ironic that a way of knowing filtered through cultural meaning making using science and technology that went from wood to steel, all in service of a governance formation of community, which then became an active resistance to an oppressive social structure, would be passed from generation to generation to generation, in other words, movement and memory, so that over 1 million people are going to be up and down the parkway in Brooklyn. Because we all know, if you know African people in New York City, Brooklyn in particular, the People's Republic of Brooklyn, that Brooklyn is really the Caribbean. In fact, it's really the Pan-African world. And again, I'm not going to stop administering or trying to administer a bit collectively with every one of the rest of us an antidote to those who would cleave closer to their masters, the descendants of slaves, who somehow seem to think that some form of nativism, blackface nativism, is a pathway to anything other than our collective demise. It is really the politics of solidarity. Shout out to my man, Howard French. Got a chance to see him. All these years I've been talking with Howard French, I never got a chance to just sit with him and, see him and be in conversation until Tuesday. He was here in town, as we said last week. I don't think I said it. Didn't think I said it on Saturday because we were correspondents. Because you don't want to talk with him about his book, we'll get him on to do that. And I know you've been talking with him, Karen. And so the book came out. This is the second Emancipation. And I got a chance to go and see him. He had some of his family, because, he got family. He was raised in D.C., between here and West Africa. So it was just good to finally see the brother in person. So we dapped it up and talked with. Wow. Just a good brother. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I had an hour, almost 2 hour long conversation, which I will be putting in Nubia. It might sit in Knarrative as well. But what a committed person. I get to sit with you, but it's like I feel like we're gathering these people who have been putting their life's work into trying to get us to understand some things, and now we're all coming together. So I just want to thank you again, because I think you were the entry point, and Tanya Pinkins was like, "Can we talk to Howard French?" So we've had
I remember that.
Conversations with him, inside Nubia, Q&As around Born in Blackness, and now this book, which centers on Kwame Nkrumah. Powerful. So thank you again.
It's very powerful. Yes, yes, ma'am. In fact, I can't wait to listen to that conversation because he's really making this point about solidarity. And Howard like you said, it's a labor of love. It is absolutely a labor of love. This one in particular, Nkrumah is the point of entry, but he's really telling the history of Black solidarity over the last century. And it was fascinating to me because, of course, the name of the book, Second Emancipation, Nkrumah, Pan-Africanism, and Global Blackness at High Tide. It will come as a surprise to many folk, probably not most people here. Certainly, folks who come into this circle week after week, day after day, with a foreknowledge and a sharing and being in community. And anyone who has been here more than a few times, will know that this book, which is written in 3 parts, the longest part being the last part, Elbows at the High Table. The second part of the book, Waiting in the Water, lays the foundation for what happens in the African independence movements of the 1960s by tracing from the 19th century to the mid 20th century African people outside of Africa who saw and believed in and lived to forge and reforge and reconnect to the continent of Africa. So Martin Delany is in this book. Edward Wilmot Blyden is in this book. James McCune Smith is in this book. You start naming all those Pan-Africans in the 19th century, J.T. Holly, James Theodore Holly. I mean, there's so many. I'm talking about Africans from the United States, Africans from the Caribbean, Africans from Latin America, who look at Africa as the place. And then Nkrumah comes to the United States, goes to school, of course, at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, at the urging of the man who would become the first prime minister of independent Nigeria, of course, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Zeke, who is telling continental Africans to go to the HBCUs, go to Lincoln, where he went to school. He was at Howard first, ran out of tuition money, and then he went to Lincoln, talking about Azikiwe, and then Nkrumah comes. They're students. He's 26 years old when he leaves Accra. Then he ends up in London, where he's with Jomo Kenyatta. They end up, of course, was coming out of Kenya. He becomes first prime minister of independent Kenya. And they're meeting people like Paul and Essie Robeson, as we've said many times, the West African student unions. The Robesons are in England for a long stretch of time. And so then they go back to the continent and lead these independence movements, and they reach out to the Africans of the diaspora: W.B. Du Bois, Maya Angelou, Alice Wyndham, Julian Mayfield, David Levering Lewis, Nell Irvin Painter. I'm just a few of the people I'm mentioning. This is the work, of course, that you will see chronicled in some ways in Shrikiana Garima's magnificent documentary, Footprints of Pan-Africanism. So when you see that, you understand that there's been this solidarity all along. And I should pause here and recognize that one of the giants of our intellectual class made transition a couple of days ago, unexpectedly. I was shocked when I got the news yesterday. But on Thursday evening, the great Mbai Cham made transition. Professor Cham, who was for 40 plus years, a professor in the African Studies department at Howard University. Cham was a big brother. He made transition in 78 from the Gambia, filmmaker, film critic, cultural interpreter, cultural meaning maker as well in terms of film. He and Haile Garima and Sri Garima were very close, he and his wife. And so I rang the bell for Mbai Cham, just a beautiful brother. And of course, he's been freed from the flesh. So like Oscar Powell and like others, celebrating this weekend, the 50th would have been the 50th birthday of Chief Black, Karabi Fubara, who movie star in Nigeria, Nollywood star, is Fubara's little brother. Last time I saw Karabi, he was a little boy running around in Columbus, Ohio. But again, he's not 50. He came from somewhere, he went back there, and we all going back that place. So that number just marks, and these transitions just mark what they sting us with in this moment of existence that we call life, which is, of course, infinitely more expansive than the marking we give it in this moment of perception that we call life. But I wanted to note that because Mbai Cham was a giant. Mbai made sure I was okay from the time I set foot on Howard's campus. He made sure I was okay, guided me through the tenure process, made sure ain't nobody mess with me because, bourgeois politics can be something. And he was a Pan-Africanist, which is what made me think about him. And so when Howard French, who was a Pan-Africanist, talked about and writes about this question of connections, that's what's going to save us. That's what's going to save us, especially now. So again, if you want to read more about Oscar Powell, Bogart Powell, about the origins of the Pan movement, the steel band associations, Badgeonism, the resistance that came from the culture. So Juve, they tried to outlaw it. Y'all not outlawing Juve, and now 1 million people going to be coming in as Juve empties into the parade on Monday. This, there's a good book by Kim Johnston with a T, Johnston, called If You Iron Good, You's King. If you, Y-U-H, iron good, you is king. Meaning what? If your pan is tuned right, if you got that steel right, and if you've ever heard of steel band orchestra, you know, there are many, many ways of Africana cultural meaning making that will move you in ways that you didn't anticipate. Woo, when you hear a steel band orchestra, it's unlike anything you've ever heard. You know, it's unlike anything you ever heard. So if those of you who can get to the Parkway, you can do it at least once in your life. Get up there on Monday and enjoy all the pageantry, understanding that that parade, in many ways, in terms of cultural meaning making, is, you know, as they go from Utica Avenue to Grand Army Plaza, you'll see costumes, you'll see flags, you'll see all of this movement, and that parade started in the 1930s in New York City. Jesse is often attributed to Jesse Waddle, but again, as you heard him say, you know, you attribute it to one or two people, but ultimately it is the people who do this work. But it was him who came together. He was an immigrant. He came to the United States from Trinidad, and they started as an indoor celebration in Harlem. Indoor celebration of what? Well, an indoor celebration because it was in the wintertime of Carnival. And what is Carnival? Carnival, of course, a ritual celebration in the Caribbean, in Latin America, particularly Brazil. Carnival, which echoes through the Gulf of Mexico into the outer ridge of what we call the United States of America, places like Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, Charleston, South Carolina, where it would be commingled and known as Mardi Gras, commingling with the French and other European traditions, but really it's an African kind of ritual celebration. So they have it indoors initially. They have it indoors. The carnival celebrations usually at that point they in the spring, March, April, but March really, they commingle it as they hid it under the ritual celebrations and the cultural meaning making and the movement and memory of Europe and Europeans, namely the Catholic Church, which is why it was easier to do it under the Catholics and the Protestants, because the Catholic Church, which is the original European Christianity, is derivative of African ways of knowing, certainly the Egyptian ways of knowing. So the whole idea of multiple saints is not unusual, because those saints come out of an iteration of ways of knowing, which you can tie back to the Netcheru in ancient Egypt, which is, of course, where the Greeks and then the Romans began to derive much of their ways of knowing formation. So the idea of one creator with multiple expressions, the Netchers is what they would call it, or Netcheru in ancient Egyptian. The saints is what they would call it in the derivative system called Christianity, European Christianity, Catholicism. And then when the Africans are reintroduced to something that they had created and bequeathed to the world, namely Christianity, by then, those Africans in West Africa aren't calling the expressions of the divine Netcheru like their ancient Egyptian family would. They would call him Orishas. In fact, there was an Orisha priest that presided over the funeral of Bogart Powell. Very interesting, because, you know, in Trinidad, they have the Shouter Baptist, also known as the Shango Baptist. So they got that African tradition there. So when you hear Pan, when you hear Carnival, when you hear that music, that's African music. It's ritual music. In many ways, this fact is a 2-volume book. And I don't know what I had, where I have. I might have actually taken it to stores. It just came out Duke University Press in the last couple of years, where a sister has gone through all of those ritual traditions and tied it back to the music and the ways of knowing and all that work. But as I said, you know, they brought that carnival celebration. Jesse Waddle and his friends come from Trinidad, brought it to New York, brought it to Harlem, not Brooklyn, but Harlem first. But it's cold outside. You have it indoors. And then they continue in that work. And then they move it by the mid-60s, 1964, they move it to Brooklyn. There's a brother named Rufus Goring who was instrumental in moving it to Brooklyn. And by 1967, there's a brother, Carlos Lazama, establishes the presence on the Eastern Parkway. Here we are 58 years in. So the carnival initially, at least in terms of the parade, features steel band music. That's why they got to have a steel band day. And then over time, the technology shifts, just like we saw in Centers. You know, when you see Brother Miles playing the guitar, next thing you know, you got in the dance in the juke joint, you got the DJ out there. You got, I mean, in other words, the technology, the science of technology will change. But in our Africana Studies framework, we ask, how did or do Africans adapt or create technology to meet their needs, to advance their ways of knowing, to support their governance formations, to allow them to engage in cultural meaning making, and ultimately to pass it on from generation to generation to generation. And as Baba Oz reminded us on Monday night in office hours, for those of you who are in Nubia, the Carnival tradition in Notting Hill, in the UK, in England, in London, initiated by the good sister Claudia Jones out of Trinidad, the great radical, the great thinker, the great meaning maker, the great organizer, Claudia Jones, who was deported from the United States of America, put out of the United States of America, as if that can stop. Okay, descendants of slaves, don't cling to your master, because once you cut yourself off from the rest of the world, all you've ensured is your doom. But Claudia Jones and them started that Notting Hill Carnival. That carnival thing is a big deal. And the last thing I'll say about it in this moment is, of course, that these labors of love, because that way of knowing is about generosity, it's about community. Those labors of love ultimately speak to connections that are poured ultimately into the emancipation struggles. Yeah. Trinidad takes its independence along with Jamaica and other places. In fact, Howard writes about the African Caribbeans who came to Kwame Nkrumah's inauguration in 1957 in Ghana, as he ascended into the prime ministership and then the presidency of Ghana. Among them was Norman Manley, who ended up being the prime minister of Jamaica. In addition to Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King and Lewis and Louise Armstrong and Mordecai Wyatt Johnson and Adam Clayton Powell and so many others, they make a call to the diaspora. We're family. And in fact, it's an interesting vignette that he relates in here, which he still, and Howard is a rigorously principled writer. As an academic and as a journalist, y'all share that as well, both y'all academics and journalists. And so he won't attest this to being accurate, but what he will attest it to is to what we all attested to, which is to say, this is what was said at one of the inaugural balls or one of the inaugural parties. This is something that's been repeated so long. There's just been, he couldn't track down the person, but he could say, this is what everybody says was said to somebody. Apparently there was a white person, British or from the United States, comes up to one of the people of African descent at one of these gatherings as Nkrumah is being inaugurated and says, how does it feel to be free? How does it feel to be independent? And the brother says, yeah, I wouldn't know. I'm from Alabama. So the whole idea that you would cut yourself off from when you cut yourself off, that's how you end up in trouble. And that goes to a bunch of you 18 to 22-year-olds are getting ready to break y'all neck on the field in Tuscaloosa playing for the University of Alabama over the next 2 months. Y'all need to stop that. You need to stop it. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So yeah, Carnival is part of those emancipation rituals. So I would group it with Juneteenth, with Emancipation Day in the Caribbean and in the United States, which is January 1st in the United States. It's August, the month of August, the first week of August in most of the Caribbean countries. So when you see this festival, it isn't a Labor Day festival. It's just that they moved it there in part because it's cold in February, March in New York. So let's move it to late summer and make it the ritual. So when you out there enjoy yourself, understand that in this U.S. social structure, this Labor Day weekend is both a ritual, kind of marking the transition into the work year, the rest of the work year. Not quite the end of summer. That's going to be September on the calendar. And of course, when we get to the equinox, we'll come back to a lot of this conversation as we play John Coltrane and think about it. But this weekend is also a potential lens for examining how labor, our efforts, our cultural meaning making, like this parade, and love, and as a way of knowing, fuel that momentum of memory. Again, our framework anchoring us and allowing us to think about who we are to each other, and then through that, who we are to the rest of the world and how we must intervene in the world. These anniversaries are important. They are important in part because they mark the momentum of memory. August 28th, 1963 on the National Mall, one day after W.E.B. Du Bois makes transition in Ghana. where he is living with Shirley Graham Du Bois, because Nkrumah says, y'all come on back here. One day after he makes transition, the beautiful way that it is described in Shirley Graham Du Bois's book, His Day is Marching On. The next day in the United States, the so-called March on Washington is held, August the 28th, 1963. And of course, it's August the 28th that is marked because August the 28th is the anniversary, the 8th anniversary of the murder of Emmett Louis Till. It's very important. And, Prof and everyone, I have been spending a great deal of time with our bibliography, with our compendium. Still astonished that as of a year ago this time, the early fall of 2024, it was at, I think, 1,600 pages and counting. So there's a year of conversations. There are 52 more Saturdays of conversation that have yet to be entered into the bibliography. And it's searchable for those who are in narrative and Nubia. And in those thousands of pages is every second of every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year of our conversations in class. Searchable by book, by musical reference, by video, searchable by name, by phrase, by concept. It really is something that I am not aware exists anywhere else. And this is from somebody who reads transcripts a lot. Michel Foucault's lectures at the Collège de France, for example, which I look at often as a real kind of template for how to think about being in public dialogue and engagement. But there's nothing like this. And I think about that now because a couple of years in, not a couple of years, about a year and a half in, we had a long conversation about Emmett Till. This is before, of course, we've talked about him intermittently. If you search, you will see. And then at some point, this conversation will be added to the bibliography as well. But even as I look over there and see DeVary's big book, Emmett Till, with the documentary book, I was looking for that book, but now I see it. But I don't need it today. I was just like trying to put my hands on it the other day, and now I see it looking me right in the face, which is often the case. But at any rate, one of those bookshelves over there that y'all can't see, which y'all see there, that's like a fraction. It's all the way in there and in there. So at any rate, the section you want to look at is, of course, still lives in the public-facing dimension, Prof, on the YouTube channel, your YouTube channel, Karen Hunter. So y'all can go and look at session 7-7. 2 7s, double 7 makes me think of Jeff Chang's book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, The History of Hip Hop, which he starts in the Caribbean. He looks at 1977, contrasting what happened in 1977 in South Africa with the murder of Steve Biko by the South African law enforcement, South African police, with 1977 in Jamaica. And he locates Bob Marley and what's going on there, with 1977 in the Bronx, when on 1 October night, Reginald Martinez Jackson hits 3 home runs on 3 consecutive pitches for the New York Yankees in the 1977 World Series. But session 7-7, let's thought about that. I take 7 MCs, put them in a line. That's 7 right there. Of course, if y'all are nations of gods and earth, you understand that way of knowing when you hear everybody and Rakim.
People can also get episode 7-7 in the podcast, In Class with Carr, wherever you get your podcast. So if you get them from Apple or whatever, you can get episode 7-7 and listen to it.
That,
yes,
my dear Professor Hunter, is something that I still be in like mute awe and appreciation of you, because you have made it possible for us, these conversations, to be so many places. I just have to laugh about that because I always forget. Yes. Get the podcast. Y'all listen. Yeah, my sister Nkechi Taifa said when she goes on her morning walks on Saturday, she be listening to us. And so thank you.
And if you're on Knarrative, all of them are there. So start watching
in one place.
Drop down right there. Series, In Class with Carr, you can watch. So there's no excuse. Is all I'm saying.
None. And of course, I was thinking about you as well because I started rereading He was featured, of course, this week, as you can imagine. Wright Thompson's book that you recommended, of course, The Barn. And adding that to Keith Beauchamp and so many other things, Emmett Till, members of his family who have written the great, Clenore Hudson Weems, who wrote her dissertation, and then 2 books on Emmett Louis Till. So much going on. In fact, I want to say it's today's New York Times. Maybe it was yesterday's New York Times. In fact, let me pull yesterday's paper. This is Friday. By the way, on the front page of yesterday's New York Times, Black parents fear DC patrols like we took 100 steps back. And they're telling, days after President Trump ordered a surge of federal law enforcement agents in Washington, Charlene Gopin told her 17-year-old son that his curfew was being cut short by 2 hours. Ms. Gopin feared that as a Black boy, her son would be caught in the dragnet set up by officers tasked by the president with cracking down on the, quote, roving mobs of wild youth. Anyway, he tried to convince her that, oh, I'm all right, Mom, ain't gonna be no problem. And she said, no, you come home 2 hours. Yeah, it's in Friday's paper. 2 hours early. He was like, no, Mom, you all right? I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. But here it is on Friday's paper, page 817. Museum acquires pistol likely used in Till murder. Of course, we talked about that on the radio. The 45 caliber pistol on display at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum has been linked to the killing of 14-year-old Emmett Till. And the museum acquired it, and I've yet to make it to the Civil Rights Museum in Mississippi. I understand it's very, very powerful. They interviewed Keith Beauchamp and Dale Killinger and several other people. But it made me think about The Barn, Wright Thompson's book, The Secret History of a Murder in Mississippi, which is excellent, as you said, Prof. And then upon reading it, I was like, yeah, so I pulled it off the shelf and began rereading parts of it this week. But go to 77, go to 97. We talk again, but 77 is like the anchor one. We went through at that point, most of the literature on Emmett Till that had been published up to that point, which was a couple of years in. 154, 156, more passing references, but 77 is the key one.
Is that the Darhi?
Yes, the great Mose Wright. Yes, out of Chicago. Man, you'll remind. Yes, Mose Wright, of course, his great uncle, where they snatched him out, and Mose Wright comes back to testify. In fact, there's a new book that's being published next week on Congressman Charles Diggs out of Michigan. The first biography, full-length biography on the life and work of Charles Diggs, who in many ways, no, I won't pick between them. I'll put them together. Charles Diggs and Adam Clayton Powell, 2 of the most effective legislators in the history of the United States Congress, regardless of background. While Powell was more public facing in terms of his oratory, his gift of connecting people through his profile, of course, his grounding in that institution, Abyssinian Baptist Church. Diggs, whose family were undertakers and did some other businesses in Detroit. Diggs was incredibly effective. Diggs was a Pan-Africanist, very pragmatic Pan-Africanist. Of course, one of Diggs' staffers, the great Randall Robinson, ended up starting Trans Africa, in part because Diggs, who was a founder of the Congressional Black Caucus, Diggs was a Pan-Africanist and believed in Africa policy. It was very fast, but the Diggs biography is coming out next week. I mentioned Charles Diggs in this moment because Diggs was the congressman of African descent who attended the trial of the killers of Emmett Till. Of course, they got off at that point. He was with Mamie Till and, back and forth at Mound Bayou, which, of course, Mamie Till stayed in that beautiful testament to Black self-determination, that city, at the home of Theodore Roosevelt Howard, T.R.M. Howard, Dr. Howard, who was a surgeon at the Black Hospital, Black-owned, Black-built, Black-run hospital in Mound Bayou, the Knights and Daughters of Tabor, T-A-B-O-R. And but he was back and forth, Dr. Howard, between his home in Mound Bayou, where Mamie Till stayed during the trial, and Charles Diggs, of course, in and out of Mound Bayou as well, and Chicago, where he had another house. And of course, Chicago, and then Illinois, then the Kenwood and other areas around Chicago, Kenwood neighborhood in Chicago, is where Mose Wright ended up working in the industries there. And Emmett Louis Till's mother knew Fred Hampton's mother, who was a major force in that neighborhood. And I bring all of that up as a prelude to this on this weekend when we think about the March on Washington as ritual, and the reason it was on August 28th, 1963, marking the death, August the 28th, 1955, of Emmett Louis Till. I bring it all up because last week I had a student come up to me. She's brand new. She's first time she ever taken one of my classes. And of course, I'm going to mark these ritual moments. So we talked about some of the ritual moments and the significance of this week in history. And afterwards, she came up and said, Dr. Carr, I asked my mom. These young people got their devices. I could make them all turn their devices off, but I use the devices as research tools. As I'm talking about things, I'll ask them to look things up, and then we get in. She said, I just text my mom. I thought it was the case, but I know now. My mom was a member of the church where Emmett Till's family went to school. My mom, and he said, my grandma knew Ms. Till. I said, oh, y'all Kojic? And she said, we're Church of God. I said, yeah, Kojic, Church of God in Christ. Then we started laughing. Yeah, because of course that's what they were. And that's where the funeral was, at that Church of God in Christ there in Chicago. And I'm telling you, the world is small, because as we got to continue to talk, when the other students were standing around, there are students now. I'm getting a lot of students who listen to Sirius XM. Some of them are here. Some of y'all are here right now in class. And I realized that, again, the concept of jailbreaking the Black university was never about replacing the Black university. It was always about recentering learning in the community, and then using whatever institutions we are in on the periphery of the major learning place, which is here, the community. This is the center of the work. So now what now we see, after these years and these investments in us really kind of continue, is that now people are showing up whose families are here, and now they're coming, and that's the way you want it. Because ultimately, that's how we are going to transcend this entire thing. You know, Prof, of course, on Friday, we talked to my friend and brother and comrade, Dr. Walter Kimbrough, who one time president of Philander Smith College, and then for a decade, the president of Dillard University in New Orleans. He'd come out of Albany State as an administrator and served for a year last year in Talladega as the interim president there, before coming back to Atlanta, where he was born and raised, and had served for a little while setting up a Black Male Institute at Morehouse. He just now got hired. He was hired to become the vice president at the United Negro College Fund. And I think it was a good move, actually, for him to do that. Dr. Lomax hired him. And then they also brought on my friend and brother, although I'm a little sad because he's leaving. He just left the faculty of North Carolina A&T. My niece is over there now. I got to make sure somebody else got some eyes on her, but I got some other people lined up. But Jelani Favors, who wrote, as far as I'm concerned, the most important recent book on HBCUs, Shelter in a Time of Storm. Jelani Favors. Right? Jelani Favors is now running the Frederick Patterson Research Center at the United Negro College Fund. So he's working with Walter, and they're building something. And you're going to hear more about that. I'll see my sister, Nina Gilbert, going down to Morehouse in a couple of weeks for their festival, their film festival. And I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing all three of them. I know I'm going to see Nina. And we're going to, whose students, by the way, at Morehouse, have subscriptions to Knarrative and Nubia. Adding to the list, Kathy Adams and the folks at Claflin do it, have it. This class that I'm in week 2, the Black University at Howard, we're going to link to Morehouse and Claflin directly, so they'll be coming in as well. In fact, I'm going to recruit some research assistants, because we got to continue to get this bibliography together. I've been brewing it up with them over the last week or so. But at any rate, all these things I'm saying as a background, again, coming back to this point, the moment of Emmett Till's murder becomes a marker in terms of momentum of memory 8 years later, that leads to why August 28th is the date for the March on Washington. And remember, with Emmett Till's murder in 1955, 14 years before that, 14 years before Emmett Till's murder, which 8 years later is the reason they have the March on the 28th, 14 years before, that's when Asa Philip Randolph threatened the United States government by saying, if you don't desegregate these jobs in the war effort, We marching on Washington, and it ain't gonna be no we out of town by 6 p.m. We staying until these jobs get freed up. And that's when Executive Order 8802, an executive order that actually was legal and made sense, unlike, we'll talk about in a minute, this case that just came down from the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals for Bozo. Bo, it's coming, Bo. Wherever you are, if you are, continue to be. But at any rate, A. Philip Randolph threatened, we're going to march on Washington and stay. And that's when they desegregated the jobs in the war effort industries. So the people who ended up in the Bay Area and Oakland, the people who ended up in Detroit and Cleveland, the people who ended up in Buffalo and Rochester, New York, a lot of those great migrations were hyper accelerated, were boosted, turbo boosted by going to work directly in those factories and working in those industries. And that's how that group that was built, that eventually emptied into the group that became the group that created Motown, among other things. Berry Gordy was working in one of them factories, of course, when he started Motown. And that's also, finally, on this subject, why we know and have the I Have a Dream speech before the one in Washington. Dr. King gave almost that exact same speech in Detroit at Cobo Hall. But the reason we have the recording is because Berry Gordy's folk recorded it, and then Berry Gordy put it out on a label. The recording, I got the record in the back, which was an affiliate of, or part of the, how do you want to call it, the constellation of businesses that were under the umbrella of Motown. So we have that speech. And in that speech, Dr. King, who gives much of the same speech he gave in Washington, in that speech, he mentions, Dr. King does, somebody he does not mention in Washington, which is Emmett Louis Till. So it's very interesting to hear all of that together. The pendulum, and this, I mentioned this a moment ago in passing when I said something about, A. Philip Randolph and Roosevelt. The pendulum may be swinging now. The pendulum may be swinging in the other direction. If you all saw the ruling, Oregon, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, Vermont, a couple of other states and private entities sued the Trump administration over these illegal tariffs, and it's clear it's illegal. And I haven't finished reading the opinion, but the Court of Appeals ruled that, yeah, they are illegal. And then he gave them till, I think, the second week in October to appeal to the Supreme Court. And people say, oh, well, he stacked the Supreme Court. Now we're going to see. Because John Roberts let this monster loose in the street. But if you remember the case that was decided this last term, it'll come to me in a minute, the case. But the ruling was that Trump had the ability to get rid of these folks in the agencies. And well, that's not the ruling. The ruling was that whether or not Donald Trump can get rid of people at the FDA, whether he can get rid of people at the National Labor Relations Board, which is the black woman he was trying to get rid of, and that's where the suit kind of originated. Whether or not he can do it was a ruling that the court needs to rule on. But in the interim, they won't prevent him from getting rid of people. So even what we see now with Lisa Cook and the Federal Reserve Commission, if Trump gets rid of her, then he's probably going to it's going to be a healthy jackhammer swipe at the international financial system. I laugh because black folk been through stuff before. Some of these people are not going to be able to take it if he breaks up the financial system, because you can't trust the Federal Reserve anymore. Not that any of us ever could, but you know what I mean. Well, the courts are going to have to rule on whether or not he can do it. But if they don't enjoin him from doing it, he could get rid of Lisa Cook, and by the time she wins the case 2 or 3 years from now, the Federal Reserve been remade, been destroyed, been turned into a bunch of political hacks, and nobody trusts it. And now you can't buy a piece of bread for under $50 or whatever is going to happen. But in the point I'm trying to make, though, in this case we have now, the courts ruled on the underlying merits of the case and said that you can't use this law to impose these universal, no-end tariffs because there's no emergency. But I was less interested in looking at the majority opinion. It was a 7-4 decision at the appeals court. Now it's going to go to the Supreme Court. But this was a huge loss for Bozo. He got mad and was on social media. And then his little fascist friend, Stephen Miller, got mad. Y'all can get mad all y'all want. But now the pendulum is beginning to swing back in the other direction. At least it looks like it's coming that way. But I'll end with this on this, because everybody's been looking at this. And again, I haven't finished reading the dissent. It's about 127 page piece, and it came out yesterday. And I just, I had all this other stuff on the schedule. I'll finish reading it today. But I was looking for the dissent because 4 people dissented. I want to know the basis of their dissent. As far as I can see right now, it's on standing grounds. But I want to see how they are talking about this dissent on the merits, because they did dissent. Now, the pendulum is continuing to swing in some ways. We saw what happened in Iowa, the first Senate district, and Caitlin Dre, who won what was a district that went for double digits for Donald Trump in the presidential election. She just won it by double digits in the other direction for the Democrats. The reason they're trying to steal seats, and of course, word came to us over the last 24 hours of what we expected in Missouri, they're going to try to take Emmanuel Cleaver out. They're going to try to break his district up and stretch it all out into the rural white nationalist Klan adjacent countryside in Missouri and get Emmanuel Cleaver out of Congress. The claim is for political reasons, not racial reasons. We know it's all racist. But that, again, just part of the ongoing warfare. You get a win here, you get a loss there, but you got to stay focused. So, today as well, just a couple of things just before we kind of come back to the labor of love in this sense. Today's International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearance. That's the United Nations. A lot of people don't know. August the 30th, every year, the United Nations marks the International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearance. These are people, which made me think about this article about this black woman telling her black son to come home 2 hours early and stay out the streets in D.C. And if those of you who've traveled to D.C. recently, right now in these last few days, it's a lot less traffic out here. Even though you don't see these thugs, these people, I don't call them thugs, I don't know, these weekend warriors, these national gardeners, as I've seen them called, because now he's talking about beautifying. So you see them picking up trash and stuff like that. Well, this is the thing people are terrified of. This is the thing that they want you to be terrified of. This notion of enforced disappearance, is snatching you, and you don't know where anybody went. It's a difficult thing because you wouldn't think something like this was something that should be in our minds, but it should have always been in our minds. But now we should think about this. We're not talking about fascist regimes. We're not talking about Turkey. We're not talking about any of the fascist regimes in the world. We're not talking about the Philippines. We're talking about Washington, D.C., everywhere else. And it's very important to understand. I was reading the annual pronouncement, the annual proclamation from the United Nations, and it should be very disturbing. Even as little Marco has said that, of course, following the directive of his Lord and Master, that he's going to deny the Palestinians, the president, Palestinian Authority, and everybody else visas ahead of the UN General Assembly, as if that's going to stop the UN General Assembly from voting to recognize Palestine as a state. They're desperate now, but that pendulum is swinging back. The shootings in Minnesota this week, you saw the coach, Coach Reeve, Cheryl Reeve of the Minnesota Lynx. I was quite... Well, I wasn't surprised because the Lynx, remember during the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor corridor there a couple of years ago, the WNBA in many ways led in terms of professional sports. So it wasn't really shocking to see the coach of the Minnesota Lynx say the sad thing in the wake of this shooting in Minneapolis is that we can't sit here and tell them the help is on the way because we're not going to do a damn thing about it. That's what she said at the press conference the other night. Said, and in the wake of that, I put something out on social media, just a quick tweet, and I said, these young people need to reconsider going to white schools. I'm not just talking about black athletes. I'm talking about athletes of conscience, since they don't want us to be there, except to run up and down the field. Shout out to the Howard University Bison and the Florida A&M Rattlers, who will be playing at the Orange Blossom Classic today. And in the game that I can't lose because my niece is a first year at North Carolina A&T, and that's 4:00 on Saturday, the John Merritt Classic in Nashville, where Tennessee State will be playing North Carolina A&T. Well, guess what? Those athletic fields, basketball, football, the revenue sports, women and men basketball, I'm counting on the sisters first to make this move. Stop going to Alabama. Stop going to Auburn. Stop going to the University of Texas and Texas A&M. Stop going to the University of Georgia. Stop going to the University of South Carolina. In fact, take Don Staley with you and go somewhere else. South Carolina State. You can go anywhere you want to go. Claflin, they got coaches. Maybe you can join the staff. Let them students come over there and watch how quick They ease up on some of this politics because voting takes place a lot of ways. You can go in the ballot booth, you can go to the store or not, you can go to the sign with that school or not. There are many ways to vote, friends, and we have to think about that. So in this Labor Day weekend, we talk about labors of love. They don't require sacrifice all the time. What I just said is not a sacrifice. You're actually moving toward liberation. Your labor is now being withdrawn from places where it is used against you and poured into places where it is used for you. Every student that will walk onto an HBCU campus who was recruited by one of these plantation schools is going to find when she gets there that they care about how you perform on the field and they care about how you perform in the classroom. And unlike these white schools, they're going to know a little something about how you like your food and where you need to get your hair fixed. They're going to know a little something about where you might want to go to have a church home. So at least you can tell your grandmama once a month you went to church, and also where you might like to hang out after class is done. In other words, the HBCU is going to surround you, and the community that those HBCUs are in are going to accept you as well and bring you in. Imagine if you were a student who's being recruited to play basketball for Georgetown or basketball for the University of Maryland or basketball for the University of Kansas or anywhere, and you decide to come to Howard. You come on campus, you walk across the campus, and every morning you're going to see young people that look like your younger siblings or cousins. Where are they going? They're too young to be in college. No, they're at the Howard University Middle School of Math and Science, which is now moved into Minor Hall. Shout out to my sister, Dr. Catherine Procope, who is the principal at what they call MS Squared, Math and Science, the Math and Science Middle School at Howard University, because they have moved into the historic Minor building, which once held Miners Teachers College, which goes back to 1851, which is actually 16 years older than Howard University. That was the place where all the teachers in DC were trained. All the black teachers. It is now part of what is known as the University of the District of Columbia. I was in a bookstore the other day, and somebody passed away, and they got rid of their collection, which is But I bought this little picture for $2, and I'm going to get a duplicate made, and I'm going to frame it, and I'm going to give that duplicate to, I might get the original, to Dr. Procope to put up in her office. This is Eva B. Dykes. Y'all know, y'all have heard me talk about Eva Dykes many times. Eva Beatrice Dykes. Eva B. Dykes, the first black woman to get a PhD, finish the requirements for a PhD, college professor and English scholar. She taught in that building those middle school students are going to now. That's Eva B. Dykes. These were reproduced by the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History. This is another one of the three sisters who got their PhDs around the same time. This is Georgiana Rose Simpson, professor of German. This is what it looked like, y'all. This is what it looked like. These black women right here. So I'm going to get one of these. I'm going to get this duplicated, and I'm going to give Professor Procope, my friend Dr. Procope, the principal there. In fact, I might get one blown up, and you can put it in the hall so those little black girls and boys going up them steps can see what it looked like. Because like I told her Tuesday morning when I was going to class, and I saw her out there directing students with her walkie-talkie and her staff, I said, Eva Dykes is happy today because the sound of laughter of children is back in here. But if you're one of those athletes, you know, they love you in Tuscaloosa. They love you till you drop a pass. And then, like fresh spring rain, the N-word coming down, cascading out of the stadium onto your back while your family looks up and says, oh, so you didn't really love my child. They love you in Knoxville, Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee, where they sing Rocky Top, 100,000 screaming people hit that rebel yell on cue. When you catch a touchdown pass, oh, but when you drop one, somewhere in that orange and white, the N-word comes tumbling down. You're not going to hear that in Green Stadium at Howard University. And they're going to care whether you go to class. Your professors look like you and care about you. So on this Labor Day weekend, let's think about the question of labor. When do we withhold it? When do we give it? Labors of love are not labors that are always labors of sacrifice. They are labors of fulfillment. Contrast Labor Day, which comes into existence in the late 19th century because white people are trying to organize unions. Many of them don't want black people in the damn union, which is a problem. But contrast that with May Day, which in many ways becomes the root of eventually what becomes Labor Day. May Day, May 1st, you see organized labor around the world. It's very important. There's a good book called America's Forgotten Holiday, May Day and Nationalism, 1867 to 1960. Donna Harvey Stack book came out in 2009, and she traces how organized labor always threatened the owners in a capitalist society since the mid-19th century. Labor Day comes into existence in the wake of labor mishaps and accidents. You remember the Triangle Shirt Fire there in Manhattan. You remember all of these places where working conditions were terrible. We talking about white people. For black people, it always was terrible. We were human trafficked after all. As Malcolm said, working from sunup to sundown. What is our labor for? It's all stolen labor. It's all labor theft. But for these Europeans, and I mean like literal Europeans coming from Southern Europe, coming over to the United States, these immigrants who aren't considered white, many of whom turned against black people because they were told if you turn against them, we might allow you into whiteness. Well, they are being oppressed because of their labor. And then the labor solidarity movements that eventually emerged, the Knights of Labor, by the 20th century, the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World, all that energy is coming out of May Day in terms of organizing, but it spills over into what becomes Labor Day. And then, of course, in the wake of one of these tragedies, the then president of the United States, Grover Cleveland, recognizes organized labor for what they call Labor Day, different than May Day, but a similar sentiment, and makes it a federal holiday. And fast forward to where we are now, and it becomes the weekend where capitalism has figured out a way to get the money that it gave you back from you in terms of Labor Day sales. Labor Day sales are oxymoron when you look at the history of Labor Day. Labor Day is not about spending money, it's about making more of it and using it for the reasons that you want to use it. It's important to think about that on this weekend of anniversaries. And so, when we think about the definition of labor, what does it mean to work? Y'all have heard, we've talked about this many times. The ancient Egyptian language has a lot of words for work, for labor. And if you think about it, I was thinking about this yesterday, and the man to talk about this would be Mario Beatty. But there's a word for love. The word does not translate as labor. The word translates as love, which I often like to use an example. The word mir, or Mary, to love. Mary Carr, beloved is the soul of Ra, one of the names of Hatshepsut, the pharaoh. Mir, to love. The determinative in love, as I've shown y'all many times, the determinative in the word, the hieroglyphs for mir. And in fact, I didn't prepare a glyph, so I'm going to try to make myself be very calm as I draw it and do it in a way that you'll see it. Now, okay, there it is. Not bad. You don't have to do it quickly. You can just do it quickly. You see that there? Yeah, see mir. Just the hieroglyph. The M, which is the R, the mouth. But then this is a sense sign. It doesn't have a sound value. It conveys an idea. This is a picture of a backhoe. A backhoe. You use it to break up the ground before you plant. Mer, love. The word for love is not translated as labor. It's translated as love. It means love. But the determinative is a tool that's used for labor. So in some ways, you could think labor of love. In other words, I love you. Do you love me? What did you do for me? Boy, I love her. She runs she runs the 100 yards and she runs the 100 meters. Do you love her at the University of Georgia? Do you love her at Texas Tech? You love her when she ran up down the field. But what did you do for her? Besides rubber hamstrings to make sure they didn't snap. You fed her so you make sure, but you feed your horse. What'd you do for her in the classroom? What'd you do for her when she was in there crying and you heard and you realized her auntie is sick and just got diagnosed and you don't know that one of the things you could do is just go in there and sit, rub her back, or just sit there? What did you do? No, you know what? You need to go to Texas Southern anyway. They got a track team at Prairie View. In other words, and they got their program you want to study in as well. I'm not saying everybody should do it, but watch this. Watch when two of them white quarterbacks. In fact, there's a quarterback battle going on right now. We'll see it played out on the field in Nashville this afternoon. There's two quarterbacks vying to be the starting quarterback at Tennessee State University. The new coach of Tennessee State University, the great Reggie Barlow, saying that they probably switch them out until they see who's going to be who. And one of the quarterbacks is white. The other is black. White quarterbacks at HBCUs ain't nothing new. Ain't nothing new. This summer, we get all the first-year athletes. We had a football team, the basketball team, women and men basketball team, and white students. There's two white dudes went to the same high school in Florida who walked me through name, image, and likeness and why they came to Howard instead of staying in the state of Florida. I was very encouraged by that. Let's let a few of them white dudes who playing for Florida State going over to Florida A&M. They're already over there. Add some more. Watch how quick that little punk governor starts changing his tune. You vote with your feet, friends, not just at the ballot box, but in the football stadium, on the basketball hardwood, in the stores. That labor, to love. The Egyptians would say to love means what did you do? And it's important to understand that. What do you owe your people? My friend Robin Kelly wrote a beautiful piece in the brand new issue of the Boston Review. This is the new edition. This is one of the 250th anniversary editions they put out. The name of his article is on the responsibility of intellectuals in the age of fascism and genocide. There's Robin Kelly. He draws from the Italian Marxist writer Antonio Gramsci to make a distinction between traditional intellectuals. Those are the people with the college professorships. Those are the talking heads on CNN. Those are the people who are staffers on Capitol Hill, or those working for the think tanks. Those are the people who have a job in a social structure that relies on them becoming part of the social structure, even if only to change it a little bit. It's a useful function until it's not. Actually, what Robin is doing is riffing on an earlier essay by Noam Chomsky, who's riffing on an earlier essay Chomsky wrote in the 60s in the wake of the Vietnam War, where he says, what's the responsibility of intellectuals? He said, because you know all them intellectuals who helped start the Vietnam War, they all work for the President of the United States and for the companies. They're considered intellectuals. He said, those are traditional intellectuals. I think about that in a week where, as I said, we interviewed my man Walter Kimbrough about these changing presidencies. I'm still thinking about the short presidency of Ben Vinson, who was the president of Howard University for only 2 years. A first-rate intellectual. Not sure it would have translated into HBCU speak, because HBCUs are the same as white schools, except they're not. And some of those things are challenges that nobody can be prepared for till you drop them down in the middle of it. And so what Robin is saying, that those are institutional intellectuals. They're traditional intellectuals. And sometimes they are limited by what they can and can't do. He says, but he distinguishes that from what he would call an organic intellectual. What is an organic intellectual? An organic intellectual, according to Gramsci, and then Robin is picking up on this, is a thinker, a worker who comes out of her class or his class, who comes out of their class. Could be upper, lower, middle class, working class, but they represent and they don't diverge from the values of what has been produced organically by those around you. Robin, I think, would qualify as an establishment intellectual and would also qualify as an organic intellectual in many ways. I think I would say the same thing about me. I would say the same thing about you, Prof. I would say the same thing about a lot of different people. But here's where I think, in terms of our labor and labors of love, we have to think and rethink how we move through the world in terms of labor. We often think of labors of love as additional, as ancillary, as on top of what our regular thing is. Well, my day job is this, and then I have a labor of love. No, that's what they want you to do. That nasty piece of work, that nasty little Russell vote, that nasty Russell vote over there at Office of Management and Budget. You see what they did? You saw what they did now, right? This whole pocket, what they call it? Pocket recession, where they let's see, it's Friday's paper. What I do is Saturday's paper. This today's paper. But see, we've been talking about that now for a year. What they was going to do with this? Remember, about maybe 2 months ago, we were talking about the recessions, how they were going to try to cut the. Let me see if I can find it. By saying if you say you're going to take money back that has been appropriated by federal government, Constitution says only Congress can appropriate money. Congress spends money. President can't do it. Executive can't do it. This little nasty piece of work now says, well, here's a loophole. If we say we're going to claw back $5 billion within 45 days of the end of Congress doesn't have time to act on it. And then by the end of the congressional term, Congress, the appropriation expires. It'll be like we couldn't spend the money. Now, that's what they're doing now. But we talked about this before. But I'm saying they are establishment intellectuals. Let me see if I can find it. Oh man, these people here, they're buck. Wow, this boy Emile Beauvais, another little nasty piece of work. He's still working at the damn Justice Department after he got confirmed to the judiciary. They just like, y'all gonna stop us? We ain't gonna stop us. This is on the same page, of course, as the news most people have already heard, which is Kamala Harris got her Secret Service protection revoked by Bozo, wherever he is. Even as you see some hopeful stuff, DC grand jurors are refusing to indict in federal assault cases. The dude that threw his Subway sandwich at the law enforcement, he got off.
The California police have put their service in to protect Kamala Harris. So they just announced that they will be, again, we are going to be our own cavalry. The California Highway Police will be stepping in to protect Kamala Harris.
Professor Hunter and everyone, it's happening in real time, y'all. It's happening in real time. For the last 5.5 years, certainly the year of the election, and when Project 2025 first people's attention got, remember, we did a whole series. If I were to stop now and go into our bibliography and type in the Cold Civil War, we would give you the exact days we walked through what was going to happen. This is the Cold Civil War, and it's heating up. California, I'm not surprised by that. I'm encouraged by it. I'm very happy to hear it. And what that is, remember now, United States Constitution. I usually keep a copy somewhere around here. Let me see. Do I have my Constitution? Oh, you know what? No, I had class. On Wednesday night, so I took it with me. 10th Amendment. 10th Amendment, I was going to read it to you literally, but explicitly, word for word. But the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the power that is not stipulated to be given to the federal government belongs to the states. California, Newsom and them already talking about, we can make deals with the Chinese. Watch this. You can't stop them. And as these states step up, J.B. Pritzker, stand there. We talked this week, as we know, we talked with Brandon Johnson, Lamont and I on the radio. We talked with the mayor of Chicago. He's standing. Look, y'all not coming to Chicago. And Pritzker's like, you're fascist. No, he's not going to do it. Wes Moore, I'm loving Wes Moore. Wes Moore said, I wore the uniform. You want to come over and ride with me? Brandon Scott, the mayor of, in fact, there's an article in today's New York Times about the black mayor. Well, not the black mayors, the mayors, because one of the mayors, the mayor of Cleveland, is the head of the Mayor's Association. And they are, no, it was yesterday's paper, they were talking about it. But what I was looking for, I'm not going to be able to find. Anyway, I'll just cite it. The whole idea that as they are pushing, people are pushing back, should be centered for what we're talking about now, because those are labors of love, but they're not ancillary. And that's where I'm going with this. When we say what we do with our job is what we have to do, and then our labors of love is what we want to do, understand that the other side is engaged in labors of love. They're trying to build a religious theocracy, a theocratic state. Don't mistake this for capitalism, although it's involved. Don't mistake this for business, although it's involved. This is theocracy. Kevin Roberts is a theocrat. Russell Vogt is a theocrat. Stephen Miller is a theocrat too. He's just a nasty piece of work. Racism, I think, is his main religion. That's not Donald Trump. You understand? Trump is just trying to stay out of jail. Trump trying to make a bunch of money, yes. But these guys are theocrats. And when you understand that, Elon Musk as well. His theology ain't the exact same as Kevin Roberts, but it's close enough to get you in the door, as well as Peter Thiel, as well as Junior Varsity Vance. These theocrats. Steve Bannon, he's got a theocratic way of knowing. These are, I won't call them Christian fascists, because to be a Christian fascist, there would have to be some notion of Christianity in it. They're cosplay Christians. It's rhetorical ethic, but they are indeed religious theocrats. And they want a theocracy, and they want to rule over you. It's not live and let live. It's them living and you doing something different. And they love it. It is their labor of love. What is your labor of love? What is your labor of love? Understand that, because in this social structure, as I was walking through Union Station this week, thinking about that statue that they have in the main hall where they were giving out them funky Shake Shack meals while people were laughing at them, which I'm sure went part in part prompted Sean Kelly, what's his name? Not Sean Duffy at the Department of Transportation, while he needed to be worrying about airline safety and traffic controllers. They're gonna take over. He talking about they're gonna take over Union Station. There's a statue of A. Philip Randolph in the main foyer of Union Station. That brother, of course, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Chambermaids, 1924, 1925, the first labor union, the Brotherhood. Dean Brazil, a book that I cherish. My man Lloyd got a copy. This is he was the dean at Morehouse. There it is, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, Brazil, for many years, the dean of men at Morehouse College. Shout out to my man Ilya Davis, Dean Davis, who is down there now in that tradition. But there's a statue of A. Philip Randolph, a man who pushed for working class people, who wouldn't have had to start a black union had the white unions understood labor solidarity earlier, who eventually became a vice president at the AFL-CIO, who was the brains behind, along with his right and left hands at the time, the great Anna Arnold Hedgeman, as I look at the book over there, from Minnesota, for the 1941 March on Washington, who then poured that energy, as you read her memoir, The Order of Chaos, into the 1963 March. It was A. Philip Randolph who understood the value of labor. And as I walked through Union Station this week, understanding that they want to try to create the illusion that they can control everything, even in that train station, and harass the unhoused, who would love, many of them, nothing more than to have a job where they could have a living wage. You think people like sleeping on the street? Well, they like that. That's why they stay out there. No, they have found themselves with the boot of this social structure on their neck. And sometimes to survive, you just rather be out there on your own. But that's not the choice they would make if they had other choices. As we see that, as I walked around downtown DC this week and saw St. Patrick's Parish, that's the oldest Catholic church in Washington, D.C. It goes back to 1792 by its own attestation. There are times, it's around the corner from the Martin Luther King Library, there are times I will go into St. Patrick's Church and sit. I'm not sitting because I'm worshiping, although all that Catholicism is derivative from the Egyptians, and I figure out all the connections I can when I sit. Sometimes I just sit in there to read. Sometimes I sit in there to be quiet for 30 minutes before I go back to campus. Sometimes I sit in there before I go to the art museum or go back to the library. Sometimes I just be sitting in there, Sometimes I just want to sit in the quiet. I walked by there Thursday, and there were chains on the railing on the steps. A lock, a master lock, and a chain stretched across from railing to railing, then another lock and a chain stretched across from the other railing, then another lock and a chain stretched. What are you chaining? What are you chaining? I thought about Matthew. What you do to the least of these, you do to me. Are you trying to protect yourself from vigilantes? I can understand that. Maybe somebody spraying graffiti, I understand that. But guess who I would often see sleeping on those steps? The unhoused. Guess who's being harassed by these punk weekend warriors from Mississippi and South Carolina, even as we're still in hurricane season? Yeah, where are they? I see more of them in the suburbs of D.C. now, Silver Spring, Montgomery County, the unhoused. Maybe they were in downtown D.C. at some point, but guess what? They cross over into Maryland. There's a hand of protection here. Governor Moore, I'm not mad at you, brother, because the cold civil war is heating up. These hateful people have come to this city. And that little cock rooster at the Pentagon, Pete Hexas, telling them they can bring their guns. It's come to the point where black women telling their children, black men telling their children, you need to come on home, straight home. And as I saw little boys and girls coming out of school, getting on the metro yesterday here in DC, coming in out of school in their school uniforms, I think about them because I understand that they're trying to signal that somehow their theocracy is inevitable. It's not inevitable. It's fragile. It never really truly existed, and it will crumble the more they push the point. But in the labor of love, we have to stop thinking about where we spend our work as work and not a labor of love, and where we spend our work that we want to do as ancillary and additional. We need to stop thinking about that. We need to think about it the way the Egyptians thought about it. The labor of love is the thing that we spend most of our time on. It's very important to understand. Looking at those chains on the steps, I ask, who do you Christians love? Who do you love? You love your property? You love the idea, the illusion that you're safe? Or do you love those people who need you the most. Because in that building, when I've been in there, and it may have been 11 o'clock or 11:30 or something, and I sit there long enough, y'all have mass, and I sit there, and you know the Catholics like the High Holy Church in South Africa, where I've done the same thing, the Anglicans. You know what it is? Stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. I know that exercise, done it many times, not a problem. But my point is this, what you talking about if it's not these people out here who need you now? I want to know, St. Patrick's Parish. I'm sure you got an excuse. I'm sure you got a wonderful explanation, but I'm wondering if you would even let Jesus Christ come in there, because I know these black mega churches wouldn't. I shouldn't say that. Some of them would. But if Jesus Christ show up in a robe that he done had on for a week and walking around in some sandals or barefoot, you thinking, okay, the whole, what do you love? Who do you love? This whole idea of them seizing what they can of the curriculum. There's an article in today's paper about how these federal cuts are going to hit the rural areas worse, which means the white areas, the very people who voted for this, are about to be slammed on it. I'm not going to take the time to show the article right now. Y'all can find it for yourself. But I thought about that because another article was focusing in on how they are trying to destroy the curriculum, and how the United States agencies are putting these paintings and featuring these paintings in their buildings, or talking about featuring these paintings. They really changed that. And I told you I've been in these museums. I'm going to another couple today. But they are, and I'm going to wind up with close for now. One of the articles talked about how they're featuring on their websites this propaganda. And one of the pieces, and I really, really hope I can put my hands on this quickly, because this piece made me very happy. See, people would think I should be disturbed. I'm not disturbed at all. I get excited about this stuff because I know what's in store. I know what's next. When they break it, you're not going to be able to put it back together. And they are on the verge of breaking it. Let me see. Missouri. Oh, man. Oh, I should ring the bell for this brother right here who made transition last month in Charlotte, but his obituary is in today's New York Times. That's James Ferguson II. This is a brother who fought to desegregate the school in North Carolina alongside people like Julius Chambers in Charlotte. He also helped. He was one of the lawyers who helped exonerate Gerald Hunt in Winston-Salem. He made transition. Let me just. And he says, I just want to feel that I've done all I can do to bring about equality. It's very important. In fact, I would read from some of this. Let me just say, James Edward Ferguson II was born on October the 10th, 1942 in Asheville, North Carolina. His father, James Jr., was a railway laborer. His mother, Nina, was a housemaid. He described facing a wall of inferiorization throughout childhood because of segregation, including attending an all-black junior high school. By the way, HBHS, segregated don't mean inferior, because them teachers was engaged in a labor of love. No James Ferguson II without those teachers. I can say that without knowing the brother. Okay? And I know that's true about his HBCU, because y'all know where he went to school. He received a bachelor's degree in English and history in 1964 from North Carolina College at Durham, now North Carolina Central. Shout out to the Eagles, where he was the student body president. Got a JD from Columbia Law School. Spent his life in a labor of love. Labor of love. By the way, Intel. If Obama or Kamala Harris had tried to get 10% government stake in Intel, they'd call him a straight communist and blocked it. Trump got a 10% stake in it, and they announced this week that they are ending their program, their internship program for HBCU law students that was in conjunction with North Carolina Central School of Law. A pipeline that over the last 4+ years has produced a number of black lawyers who have moved into corporate America through the door that Intel provided. But now Intel is ending it. So what y'all gonna do? You gonna lay down? Or you gonna engage in a labor of love and build your black institutions? Young black athletes, time for you to stop thinking about your glory as coming through these white schools. Young white athletes, young Asian and Latino athletes, maybe you should think the same. It's time to engage in a different kind of labor. Just a couple of things. As I said, the Black University class that we've started is going well. Still working on details and to make this public when we do. I'm very excited. These young people are doing some incredible work. I'm going to say a little bit less about that here and maybe some more on Monday in office hours. I know that Monday is office hours and it's typically Labor Day holiday. There'll be people traveling back and forth. Framing question 3 in our Introduction to Afro-American Studies course that we're doing in Nubia. We're scheduled to begin framing question 3. We ended framing question 2 on last Monday. So we're going to go into framing question 3 this week. But I thought maybe because it's the Labor Day ritual and people might be on the road, that maybe we'll just have open conversation on Monday and then go the following Monday into our regular work. But just think about labor of love this weekend and what that could look like in a different way.
Yes. Thank you. Thank everyone. I'm loving the evolution of us, even in how we're in community. I know it's tough for some folk on YouTube because it's a yell in the void type of space, but I know a lot of Nubians have jumped in to the YouTube space, and it is
okay.
it's almost not, can't compare to what's going on in Nubia, but it's almost very close.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm watching it. I don't have to work as hard. You know.
And then there are other people. Well, here it is, Prof. I found it. I'm glad you said that. It gave me the beat I needed. This is the article I'm gonna show y'all. Y'all see, look at these young cats. You know, I'm 60. You get to an age when everybody look young.
Yes.
we were at a meeting. I was in Baltimore at Morgan State, and Brandon Scott came in, and shout out to Brother Scott, his wife. They have a newborn, and clearly this is a cat who had been up all night with the baby, right? So he walks in, look, you know, he got that distinctive haircut, right? So if not for that and that face, I thought he was a student. And I'm saying, look, here's the mayor of Cleveland. You see it? Mayor Justin Bibb of Cleveland, who leads the Democratic Mayors Association, urged a serious on safety approach and an emphasis on what felt most pressing in voters' lives. Here's what Brandon Scott said. They are going to be trying to basically attack every single one of us and use every city, all of our communities as political pawns. These two and all the people that Brandon Scott mentioned, when Lamont and I talked with him, he and his wife, they said 2 of our children are already on to school. The 3rd one we're getting out the door, but he took about 15 minutes to talk with us. And they're in conversation with each other. This is why I love this article. Mayors of Democratic cities seek a united front against White House pressure. Prof, they don't have the muscle. They want us to think they do. But I'm going to tell you right now, not only are we going to win this, when we do, it's going to remake everything. That's all I mean, y'all. When I say we're going to renegotiate the terms of this funky criminal enterprise. They had a chance during Reconstruction. They failed. They pushed back for years. We tried again in the 60s, and they pushed back. It took them 70 years, and now they caught the car. Guess what? This time politically, we end it. It's going to end. It's going to end. We're going to help you.
I actually agree with that.
Yeah.
But the focus, the distractions are real. So we just got to stay focused, and we got to stay together. You ain't got to like everybody.
No.
But just stay. This is the one time. And fortunately, we kind of do move like a block. We don't say we do. We always talk about crabs in a barrel. But the numbers don't lie, Dr. Carr. We move the way we need to move.
That's right. Yeah. That's right, Professor Hunter. You're absolutely right. We move the way we need. Isn't there something in it? And again, that's this conversation we've been having, and this conversation now that is years in the development, that is bringing people who have been talking together for many years before that, and then other people who thought they were alone. It is revealing exactly what you just said. This is why they fight over curriculum. I wish I could find the picture. They put this picture on the website, maybe on the Department of Education website. And I said, I know that picture. I know that picture. And then I realized, that's the same picture. It's Manifest Destiny. See this? Remember this book right here? Donald Yakovon, Teaching White Supremacy, America's Democratic Ordeal. This is the picture they got. This is the Manifest Destiny picture. Trump was tweeting. I love this picture because this is the white woman going toward California with all the settlers and all that stuff behind. This is their idea. You don't control the curriculum, friends. What you fighting overtime to do in these classrooms on Saturdays, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, in between, we got tens of thousands of people wearing your ass out You know what I'm saying? So don't you go right ahead. You think you control? And guess what? When you cut a budget, you just kill the school. The superintendent of schools in this little town of Oklahoma said, "We're dead. If you take our money, we're dead." But guess what? We on YouTube. Who you think gonna win? You're right, bro. We not.
Yeah. Yeah. And every day people are waking up to that reality. And I think, they win when you feel despair. They win when you feel alone. They win
That's right.
when you don't have any hope. But it's your responsibility to find some place to be. And it doesn't have to be here. Find you a group of people who are doing the thing that
That's
you
right.
in your spirit. And that's an active seeking, right? Actively seek the thing. Stop bitching and complaining about the thing. Go actively seek it and then find other people. Because it's the only way forward is together.
Together.
Not put alone.
Together.
Shouldn't have to.
I thought about you. I know you talked about this on the air, but I hope you say just a second here before we go. I thought about the governance and social structure this week because in the social structure framing, who we are to other people, they wanted to jump on Taylor Townsend, and they asked all those black women the same question. Why don't you ask them white girls? And my friend Coco Nichols at Norfolk State said that. Why don't you ask white girls? But I thought in a minute, I thought, don't you think they have a group chat? Because when Naomi Osaka said what she said, I'm saying, oh, y'all coordinated this. She's kind of like the big sister now with the Williams. I don't know, but what do you think about that? Will you share? Because I didn't have any.
I mean, even Coco, breaking out into tears in her match and then looking over and seeing Simone Biles. She said, I looked over and I saw Simone Biles and I said, what she's able to do, what I'm dealing with right now is nothing. Okay, Simone Biles is here watching me. I got to stand up. And she came back and won that match. It's so much bigger and deeper than the group chat. It's a deep understanding, again, that it's not just that we stand on shoulders. It's not just that we pass some batons. It's that we have a responsibility to show up for one another. And this time,
each other. That's right.
And you mentioned it with the WNBA when the summer George Floyd, they led that march.
Yes,
they led that charge. Maya Moore gave up her career to fight for criminal justice, and then married that man.
Labor of love. That's right.
This is, and it's not about money, right? Because they weren't getting paid nothing. And they were willing to give it all up because it was important. And even the men, the I Can't Breathe t-shirts and all the different ways that they're putting in their social justice movements. I'm watching Kyrie Irving show up in a way that it's like, this is that time. So if you're out there bitching and complaining, you're part of the problem. This is a time that's going to reveal who's really about this work. And it's not going to be the most popular. It's not going to be the people with millions of followers, because I don't know that Fred Hampton had followers when they killed that man in his bed. I just know he had a vision and a mission, and he was about that work. And it was enough to make the FBI say he's got to go. And what was that work? Building community.
That's right.
That's resistance. It's not them, it's not firing off bullets. It's building community. That's the biggest threat to this. So if you're outside of community, you're part of the problem. Go find yourself someplace to be.
That's a word. Let's stop. Could we pause there? That's a word.
Yes.
Let that resonate.
We can. I love you too.
See y'all Monday night.
Okay. All right. Bye, y'all.